Good morning. Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce Gerry Hendershot. I know Gerry because we both attended a long-standing poetry class at OLLI, which is the Osher Institute for Lifelong Learning, affiliated with American University. Gerry studied poetry for about 9 or 10 years in this continuing education program. He's very knowledgeable about poetry, and I really enjoy his poems, which have excellent rhythm and rhyme, which is, I find, so hard to do, but he seems to do it painlessly. He's published poems in the Ekphrastic Review and other journals. Ekphrastic, for those of you who don't know, is a poem that gives a vivid description of a work of art. Gerry has also taught OLLI courses on African American poets, as well as poetry and art, and is a founder of a poetry group in University Park, where he lives. In June, he will be teaching a course entitled Women Poets on Women's Concerns, which I think is a very enticing title. So today he will be talking about, is Jesus human, and how that is conveyed through art and poetry.
Thank you, Elaine. Just let me ask, we're here until 10:45, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And let me begin by saying that this is a huge topic, the humanity and divinity of Jesus. I'm not really confident that we'll solve the problem in this session, but I hope at least to raise the issue in a way that you feel you can engage it and work with it yourself. And if there's any interest, I would be glad to come back another time to continue the discussion, because it's been a long time conversation in my own mind about this. I'm going to be sharing my screen most of the time, and at intervals I will ask somebody on Zoom to read some passages. I think that'll work better than asking people in the room. And then from time to time, I'll invite questions and comments as well. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I was encouraged to switch off the share screen so we could see each other as often as possible, and I will try to remember to do that. Well, this is a subject: is Jesus human? The early church said yes, Jesus is human, but also divine. So we're going to address that question in the short time we have together this morning. I'm particularly interested in that last question: how do we reconcile the humanity of Jesus with his divinity? And also, why is it important to our faith that Jesus be seen by us as human? Those are questions that have been with me for a long time. And I want to start by quoting Frederick Buechner, who's a writer and ordained Presbyterian minister. He wrote, "There are Baptists, Methodists, Episcopalians, there are Presbyterians, Lutherans, Congregationalists, there are disciples of Christ, there are Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses. There are Moravians, there are Methodists," that's my insert. "There are Quakers. By and large, they all believe pretty much the same things and are confused about the same things and keep their fingers crossed during the same parts of the Nicene Creed." Do you keep your fingers crossed during the Nicene Creed? I don't literally cross my fingers, but there are some places in the Nicene Creed where I do have my questions, my doubts. And this is also from Frederick Buechner, one of my favorite quotes: "Whether your faith is that there is a God or that there is not a God, if you don't have any doubts, you're either kidding yourself or asleep. Doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving." Doubts are the ants in the pants of faith. They keep it awake and moving. What he's doing here, and what I want you to do, to encourage you to do, is be open to your doubts and deal with them. Don't just sweep them under the rug, but engage them and talk about them with others and think about them yourself. So this is the Nicene Creed. I'm now attending Episcopal Church in College Park, St. Andrews, and we say the Nicene Creed every week. We said it this morning. I was at the early worship there this morning and said the Nicene Creed. I'm going to read that part of it, which most directly raises the question of the divinity and humanity of Jesus. I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, of all things visible and invisible. I believe in one Lord, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, born of the Father before all ages, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial with the Father. Through him all things were made for us men and for our salvation. He came down from heaven and by the Holy Spirit was incarnate of the Virgin Mary and became man. So here in this portion, the opening portion of the Nicene Creed, which is one of the foundational creeds of the Christian faith, God is asserted to be true. Jesus is asserted to be true God, but also man. So both God, truly man, truly God, but also man and truly man. So that's the issue we're addressing. It came up. The Nicene Creed was actually the first version of it was written at the Council of Nicaea in 325, and it was in response to some beliefs that were at that time prominent in some parts of Christendom. Christendom was only about 300 years old, so it's still fairly young from our perspective. But at that time, there were bishops in the church who thought that Jesus was human, and other bishops who thought that Jesus may have been human, but he was also or only divine. So the issue was very alive for them at that time. And the council in Nicaea was an attempt to address that issue. There were some other issues as well. And it was held in 325 in what was then the city of Nicaea. And the outcome was a statement, the Nicene Creed, what became the Nicene Creed, that by most accounts, by most interpretations, is an affirmation of the divinity of Jesus. And it's sort of in contrast to that, not in opposition, but in contrast to that I wanted to bring up in this discussion, the humanity of Jesus. This was the church that I now attend, worship where I now attend, follows the lectionary. I don't know if Dumbarton does or not, but the gospel reading assigned for this Sunday was from John 10, and this is a portion of it, which was read in worship that I attended about an hour or so ago. At that time, the festival of the dedication took place in Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the portico of Solomon. So the Jews gathered round him and said to him, "How long will you keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Jesus answered, "I have told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do in my Father's name testify to me, but you do not believe because you do not belong to my sheep. What my Father has given me is greater than all else, and no one can snatch it out of the Father's hand. The Father and I are one. The Father and I are one." Hearing that again this morning, I took those last words, "the Father and I are one," as a clear assertion by Jesus, as given to us by John, that Jesus was claiming divinity, was claiming to be God. But our pastor this morning preach that what Jesus was doing in this gospel statement was not to claim divinity, but to claim association with full-hearted support of God's work in the world. He's saying that God loves the world. God is working in the world to make it a place that meets the expectations that we have possible for us. But he was not claiming, according to our preacher, divinity. Now we could debate that, but she was very forceful in saying that in this case, at least, Jesus was not claiming divinity. So I want to move now to some considerations of the humanity of Jesus, but this might be a good opportunity for me to stop and ask if there are any questions. You can put the questions in the chat, or you can take them in the room, I guess.
Okay, first I will ask if there are any questions or comments in the room on the biblical passages or the points we've been dealing with yet. Okay, if not, Roger, you can see if there are any on Zoom.
No.
Okay, then Gerry, we would appreciate your going on.
Thank you. One of the things that long ago, probably 20 years ago or so, brought home to me in a very memorable way about the humanity of Jesus was an article that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 1986, titled "On the Physical Death of Jesus Christ." And this is just the abstract, which I'll read. Jesus of Nazareth underwent Jewish and Roman trials, was flogged, and was sentenced to death by crucifixion. The scourging produced deep stripe-like lacerations and appreciable blood loss, and it probably set the stage for hypovolemic shock. And hypovolemic shock is a condition in which the volume of blood plasma is too low and causes rapid heartbeat, weak pulse, confusion, and loss of consciousness, as evidenced by the fact that Jesus was too weakened to carry the crossbar to Golgotha. At the site of crucifixion, his wrists were nailed to the patibulum, and after the patibulum was lifted onto the upright post, the stipes, his feet were nailed to the stipes. The major pathophysiologic effect of crucifixion was an interference with normal respiration. Accordingly, death resulted primarily from hypovolemic shock and exhaustion asphyxia. Jesus' death was ensured by the thrust of the soldier's spear into his side. Modern medical interpretation of the historical evidence indicated that Jesus was dead when he was taken down from the cross. I read this in a class, a Bible study class at the Church of Pilgrims in Washington, where I was a long-term member. And one of the people in that class came up to me afterwards and said that he had never before appreciated the humanity, the significance of the death of Jesus and the manner of his death. My observation would be that too often when we talk about the crucifixion, we move too quickly to Easter Sunday and the resurrection. But in Eastern Orthodox Church, it's more importance, more emphasis laid on the crucifixion and the manner of Jesus's death, which this particular article brought home to me very clearly. I wanted to move on from there. Thank you, Elaine, for that testimony to my prayer, to my poetry. Now I'm going to make you listen to an example of it. I've thought a lot about the humanity of Jesus and how it's important to our faith. And this is a poem I read after thinking about these matters, and it's called "My Khaki Urine Stain." My khakis urine stained. Most scholars say that he was only 33, and it is understood his health was always good. Yes, sometimes he got mad, and sometimes he seemed sad. Sometimes he went away into the hills to pray. But that was not a trouble sign. When he returned, he was just fine. Compare him then with me, approaching 83. My knees and hips are pained, my khakis urine stained. To eat, I wear a bib, my speech no longer glib. And when at last I sleep, it's shallow, never deep. The Bible says, Christ died for thee. But how could he at 33? What I was confronting in that poem is the humanity of Jesus and our humanity. I wrote this, I was 83 at the time, I'm now 84, but I'm aware, much more aware now than I was earlier in my life, of the limitations of the human body. And Jesus was human, the Nicene Creed tells us, as well as divine. But he didn't, as his poem suggests, he didn't experience that part of humanity that people who live to an older age do. So the question it raises is, how could Christ, who died at 33, when apparently until his last days in good health, how could he appreciate what we as older people experience in later life in our declining years? Now, I know how I would answer that question, and I'd be glad to answer it if anybody asks, but I just want to raise the question now. And this is why I think the humanity of Jesus is important to all whom we try to reach with the good news. Jesus was human. He lived a life. He experienced life as we experience life. And he died as we all will die. And it's his humanity which makes his divinity so understandable by me, and I hope by you as well. And I think that's the word that we have to share with other people who are outside of the church, outside of the belief. I'm going to do a little ekphrastic poetry here, but this is another opportunity for me to ask if there are any questions in the room or on Zoom.
Okay, first in the room, any comments on what we've just had? I think people here are eager to get started. Roger, if you want to check on Zoom.
Yes. Ginny is here, and I can't seem to unmute her if she has a question. I don't know that she does. It's just her picture on the screen. So I'm trying to unmute her in case she wants to come in, but
that's not possible. So we will have to go on. So Gerry, please do.
Yeah.
Okay, this is we're going to look at two pieces of art, both of which, for me, address the issue of the humanity of Jesus. This is an image. This image is a photograph of actually the artwork that it's an image of is a photograph, and this is Christ. It's a crucifix. It's Christ on the cross. And to get an idea of its size, this is the artist, Andre Serrano, standing beside a full-size image of the art, which is a photograph. And he titled it Immersion, and then in parentheses, Piss Jesus. And you may be familiar with this work of art. It caused a lot of attention and controversy at the time it was first made public, and I think has continued to do so. Let me just ask, what are we looking at here? Anybody in the room want to say? From memory?
Does this picture look familiar to anybody? Gerry, you are bringing us something that the people here have not seemed to.
Okay, what the artist did, and that is the artist in the lower right-hand corner of the shared screen, was collect urine, his own urine, and fill the container with urine, and then immersed the crucifix in the urine, and then photographed it. So this is a picture through a container of urine of the crucifix. And this was, as you might expect, very controversial. And this is a little clip from the Guardian newspaper, an English newspaper, in 2011, which is well after the artwork had been made public, but it was being shown in France and led to a lot of protests. And I'll just read it. When New York artist Andre Serrano plunged a plastic crucifix into a glass of his own urine and photographed it in 1987 under the title Piss Christ, he said he was making a statement on the misuse of religion. Controversy has followed the work ever since, but reached an unprecedented peak on Palm Sunday. This is some time ago, of course, when it was attacked with hammers and destroyed after an anti-blasphemy campaign by French Catholic fundamentalists in the southern city of Avignon. The photograph, Immersion Piss Christ, was part of Serrano's series showing religious objects submerged in fluids such as blood and milk. In 1989, right-wing Christian senators' criticism of Piss Christ led to a heated U.S. debate on public arts funding. Republican Jesse Helms told the Senate Serrano was not an artist, he's a jerk. Let's take another look at the photograph. Comments on the photograph or the reaction to it from anybody in the room or on Zoom?
Joan.
I think it looks quite beautiful, actually. It looks like there's, without knowing what was done, it's almost like gold from heaven showering down on Jesus.
Okay, the comments being made, I don't know if you could hear very well there. If you're looking at the photograph, just as a photograph, there is a beauty to it, and it looks like there's a shower. Anybody else here?
We could also talk about Republican name calling. Ridiculous.
Okay, a little name calling by a Republican who was mentioned in that clip. Anybody else here present? Okay, I'll turn it over, Roger, to you.
I don't see any hands. I might just comment that my first glance at it, all the little dots behind the image suggested to me a photograph taken from high up at night and seeing lights of a city behind it, like that's the humanity, and here is Jesus bathed in beautiful golden light. So that's the way I took it just at first glance.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Gerry, please continue.
This is a poem by an American poet. I'm not sure when it was written. I didn't put that on this document. But Andrew Hudgens is a well-known American poet, still living. And this is a poem that he wrote about the image that you just saw. And could we have somebody on Zoom read this? There's somebody who would just read this. It's not very long.
Raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or unmute yourself. Everybody's shy.
Okay, Roger, do you want to do the honors?
Sure. If we did not know it was cow's blood and urine, if we did not know that Serrano had for weeks hoarded his urine in a plastic vat, if we did not know the cross was gimcrack plastic, we would assume it was too beautiful. We would assume it was the resurrection glory. Christ transformed to light by light, because the blood and urine burn like a halo, and light, as always, light makes it beautiful.
Go ahead.
We are born between the urine and the feces, Augustine says, and so was Christ, if there was a Christ, skidding into this world as we do on a tide of blood and urine. Blood, feces, urine, what the fallen world is made of, and what we make. He peed, ejaculated, shat, wept, bled under Pontius Pilate, and I assume the mutilated God, the criminal, humiliated God, voided himself on the cross, and the blood and urine smeared his legs, and he ascended bodily into heaven. And on the third day, he rose into glory, which is what we see here. The piss Christ in glowing blood, the whole irreducible point of the faith, God thrown in human waste, submerged and shining. We have grown used to beauty without horror. We have grown used to useless beauty. That's it, right?
That's it. Yep. Well, I'd very much like to hear your reactions to what Hudgens said here.
And Roger, you will note there is a chat comment.
Oh, good. Thank you. Cannot know human urine is part of the picture. Have to believe the words of the artists in the name given by its author. That's from Walter.
Could you read it again, please?
Cannot know human urine is part of the picture. Have to believe the words as the artist in the name given by its author.
Okay.
We have another one coming.
We have several comments now, both in person and I think on Zoom. And first in person, we have Elaine here.
Well, for me, the poem brings home humanity in Christ. He was not elevated in his glory of light and so forth. He was down there with the human excrement. Everything that we deal with.
Okay, Elaine feels that the poem, I would say, enhanced the meaning of the artwork and brought the physicality and the reality of being here on earth to her. Anybody else present? Okay, Joe?
Well, for me, the poem was exactly my feelings. Looking at the picture, I could not appreciate what the artist was trying to do until I knew what the art was, what he had done. So just looking at it, how does that, talk about the materialism and humanity of Christ and so forth and so on. But once you understand the whole concept that the poem pointed out, then it became clear.
Okay, Joe's comment that this poem enhanced understanding of the visual artwork that we saw, for those who call it artwork. And that might not be everyone. Anybody else in person who has a comment to make?
Alan?
Alan?
I think the poem tells more than the artist.
Okay, bold-faced statement from Alan that the poem conveys more than the original art piece itself. Maybe they come together. And someone else?
Spot on.
Okay, agreement here for that that comment. I'll turn it over to you, Roger.
I don't see any others on chat or, oh, there's Ella. She wants to do it in person. So go ahead, Ella.
Does that work sound-wise?
Yes. What?
Okay.
We can hear you.
Okay. I'm always struck by the history, which I think in many ways this artist captured, which has rendered as filth and untouchable the most natural aspects of a human body and its working. And so for those of us who are put off or offended by such things, yet longing to have a sense that Jesus was both fully human and fully divine, it would not be a Jesus fully human without acknowledging all of this. I think it's actually an incident of religion that bodily fluids led to things like cloistering women in red tents in times of menstruation, or sterilizing our language and our images of a fully human Jesus without recognizing all of these things. I find it enormously powerful. I find it effective. And I also find it interesting over time how we've longed for an answer to fully human and fully divine, yet we assert belief in an omniscient, omnipresent God who would not only know all of those things, but created all of those things. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was a very helpful comment. We're gonna.
I have one quick comment that I thought of the AIDS crisis and how the dying patients had all of this going on, the horror. And since it was made in 1987, it seems like that might have been on the artist's mind.
That's thank you for making that connection. That's important to understand the work historically. We're going to turn, we don't have much time, but we can turn briefly to this painting by Rembrandt. He did a series of small paintings. This one is only 10 inches by 9 inches of the head of Christ. This is a poem by Denise Levertov, who interestingly was born into a Jewish family and converted to Christianity as an adult. In fact, I think her father, Elaine, you may remember, I think her father was a rabbi, but she converted to Christianity. And this is her poem. It's not real long, but I will read it. This, in contrast to the Fist Jesus painting, raises the issue not so much about the physical, bodily humanity of Jesus, but the humanity of Jesus in his mind, in his emotions. And this is a poem by Denise Levertov, which is about the painting. Maybe he looked indeed much as Rembrandt envisioned him, in those small heads that seem in fact portraits of more than a model. A dark, still young, very intelligent face, a soul mirror gaze of deep understanding, unjudging. That face, in extremis, would have clenched its teeth in a grimace not shown in even the great crucifixions. The burden of humanness, I begin to see, exacted from him that he taste also the humiliation of dread, the cold sweat of wanting to let the whole thing go, like any mortal hero out of his depth, like anyone who has taken herself back. The painters, even the greatest, don't show how in the midnight garden or staggering uphill under the weight of the cross, he went through even the human longing to simply cease, to not be, not torture of body, not the hideous betrayals humans commit, nor the faithless weakness of friends, and surely not the anticipation of death. Not then, in agony's grip, was incarnation's heaviest weight. But this sickened desire to renege, to step back from what he, who was God, had promised himself and had entered time and flesh to enact. Sublime acceptance, to be absolute, had to have welled up from those depths where purpose drifted for mortal moments. Levertov is saying here, as I read it, that not only was Jesus human and divine, not only was he human in a bodily sense, he had the same doubts and disappointments and feelings of humiliation that all of us experience during our lifetime. And yet he went to his death willingly in the end, because he believed that was God's will for him. Well, we're going to have to end there since our time is up. Any last comments on the Leverton poem? Or the painting by Rembrandt?
Let me say, I believe that that is a wonderful place to end. I personally think I'm grateful that we had these things in this order. It might have been a little tougher if we did otherwise. Now,